If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, what is the creepiest experience you have ever had? I grew up in an old farmhouse. It was around 150 years old, must be around 175 now, located in a sparsely populated area in north-central Iowa. Very rural. There were a lot of small odd occurrences over the years my family lived there, but the most frightening one for me occurred when I was a teenager. I was old enough to be home alone, but not old enough to drive. My parents and older sister were all out for the night, so it was just me and the dogs at home. I settled in to watch a movie in the living room located on the first floor of the house when I heard someone walking heavily in the hallway above me. This house had plank wood flooring with nothing remotely sound insulating. These steps were distinct, heavy, and unmistakable. I knew I was the only person home and the house was miles from the closest neighbor, let alone town. My stomach was in a knot, but tried to be logical and quickly decided it must be a dog, even though the steps sounded much too heavy for our small terriers. I leaned forward in the recliner to call for them, but as I leaned forward I saw that both dogs were already sitting at my feet. And they looked terrified. I took the dogs, the wireless house phone, and ran out of the house, and locked myself in my mom's car in the driveway. I called my parents and waited in the car for them to get home. They had both had enough experiences in the house to not doubt me. ETA another story from that house. The family who built the house lived out their lives there, including their daughter. Her name was Minnie and she never married and thus lived in the house her entire life, birth to death. A few years after my parents moved, I was talking to my mom about all the odd incidents that happened in that house. She asked me if I ever found little gold safety pins around the house. I hadn't. She then shared that she was always finding little gold safety pins when she was alone in the house. Multiple times she had even had them drop onto her, landing in her book or on her sewing project. She would look up and even check for cracks in the ceiling, but they seemed to fall from nowhere. It made her uneasy, but it mostly just perplexed her. Then my grandma told my mom that she had once met Minnie years ago. My grandma was an RN at the local hospital, and when she was a young nurse, Minnie came into the ER. She was very old at this point and in poor health. In order to treat her, the nurses had to undress her as she was wearing layers and layers of clothes. My grandma said it was an incredibly frustrating task because all of her layers of clothes were fastened together with hundreds upon hundreds of tiny gold safety pins. I live in Australia, and when I was in high school camp, we were sleeping in tents in the national park/forest. In the middle of the night we woke up to what we thought was a screaming sound and were freaked out. In the morning, our camp guide told us that a few years ago there was a woman murdered in the national park, and apparently the noise we heard was the lyrebird replicating her screams. Security guard here. This actually happened recently. I agreed to move to a different post that was closer to home, and it's the oldest one I've worked. Not very old, built in the late 70s, but I found out people have died there. This place has a weird setup in the office area. The phone/comm room has a window looking into the big conference room, partially because the receivers and whatnot for the presenters' mics are in there. I was in there working on trying to restore some camera feeds, and from behind me, I heard a rough female voice say my full first name. I don't think anyone I work with even knows it, it isn't even on my ID badge. I turned around, and through that window, I saw what looked like an old woman in a nightgown walking away with her back turned to me. I legit jogged out of the phone room and down the hall to see who it was. Nobody there, no place they could have gone without me catching them. I accept and generally don't mind stuff you could call paranormal. I've experienced a lot of stuff I can't explain. I get it, go ahead and do your ghostly thing. I grew up in the small town of Okinawan, Massachusetts. There was a road that cut through the state forest where a ton of weird happenings occurred over the years, the Freetown Fall River State Forest. Seriously, like cult murders in the 70s, UFO sightings, weird stuff. The road starts out paved, but if you keep going and going, it becomes more like a rural dirt trail. I was probably 9 or 10 years old when my brother, his friend, and my twin sister rode our bikes down the road. We rode for hours and hours until we got past the pavement and onto the dirt. And then we just kept going. We rode past the dirt bike trail parking lots, all the trailheads, until we were in the middle of nowhere and there were no more pull-offs anywhere, no cars passing us. We rounded a bend in the road and we all stopped our bikes short. Down the way was what looked like an old man, in a full black suit with big coat and hat, slowly limping down the road towards us, far enough away that you couldn't see the details of his face. The thing is, we were in the middle of nowhere and it was summer. Summer in New England isn't hot, But no one would be just walking miles and miles down a lone road in a completely black suit with a coat and hat. I can't remember if I convinced the others to turn around or not, but it was so creepy that it stuck with me to this day. That old man had no business being on that road on foot that far into the forest. It was so strange. This was about 3 years ago. My older brother had been in college in San Jose, California for a couple years now and would come over every summer. During this time, I took the initiative to work on my health and would run every day every morning. I would run this small trail on the end of an orchard that was private property. People run in the yard often, but I was the only one who would run along their fence and eventually got permission from them to run within the fence but not into the orchards. As such, I would run from my house, make a right from the end of my block and keep going 3 miles down until I reach an intersection and run back. One night, a few weeks before my brother was set to come back from college, I had a nightmare. This part may be a little unsettling, so I'm giving a warning. The nightmare, as I remember it vividly, even to this day, starts with me going on a run down my normal trail, but during the afternoon instead of the early morning. I ran down to where I got to the fence, crossed, and ran along the edge of the orchards. Then as I ran, I saw people I didn't recognize within the orchards. A group of big, bearded men with ragged clothing were whipping a group of black people in the orchards. I was horrified but stopped as soon as one of the big men turned and saw me. He whistled with his 2 fingers, and from behind the group of tortured black people stood a large black man who had been mutilated from the torture, who then began to charge at me with blinding speed and an unimaginable amount of rage and pain that I had ever seen in a human being's face. I had already been winded from the run, but I caught a second wind from adrenaline and sprinted back out from the orchards. But as the man ran out from the orchard, with almost supernatural speed, he caught me, pushing me to the dirt, and screamed a blood-curdling scream that would eventually wake me up. I was terrified but shrugged it off. Weeks go by and I could still vividly remember the nightmare, which is irregular for me as I normally never remember any of my dreams. My brother came back from college and we spent a couple days with the family, and one day he asks me if there was anywhere nearby to go looking for bugs. He was taking an environmental class that had him observing certain insects and bugs and wondered what he could find here in a more rural area compared to the Bay Area he had now grown familiar with. I instantly thought about my running trail and simultaneously remembered my nightmare. He, though it was hilarious and jokingly accused me of being a racist, I swear I'm not. We got a good laugh and decided to walk down the trail to look for bugs for his class. I led the way and watched him explore and talk more and more about bugs and his college life. We got to the point in the trail where we walked past the fence and were walking on the edge of the orchards. He wasn't satisfied with the exploration, so I offered going a little further and go right on the trail, which would lead to a small patch I had never gone on my many years of running that was between the private property and the light field of dead grass that led to the road. We made it to the patch and started walking, where he found more and more bugs, so good for him. He and I then remembered my nightmare that I had just shared with him hours before, and then stopped walking as we notice a large tree that has branches outstretched so far that they went over the small creek of water next to the patch in the orchards, which was about the width of 2 two-lane roads, so pretty fucking large branches. On one of those branches was a long, incredibly old and definitely used piece of rope that had been tied in a noose just above our heads. It swayed in the wind, brown and frizzy from weathering and use. It was there and it was real, as we both saw, and could move it as we threw sticks at it to make sure we weren't just seeing it. We nervously laughed but openly agree that we wouldn't walk much further after that and should head back soon. After passing the tree and finding a good spot with a log where my brother found tons of bugs, we decided to go back. We both openly agreed to be on the lookout for the tree with the noose as we walked our way back. We had talked and remained calm the whole way down and remained alert the whole time. It wasn't until we had walked a few meters past the same tree that we realized something was off. My brother immediately noticed that we missed the noose. We turned back to look at the tree again, and like we suspected, the noose was no longer on the tree. In that moment, I had a chill go down my spine. No sign of the rope on the ground, in the creek, orchard, nothing. My brother, who is normally calm and pretty brave and brash in moments of danger, immediately said we should start walking out of the patch. Not long after we started walking, we walked, then jogged, then into a full-blown sprint out of the patch. I was a few feet ahead of my brother and had halted so he could catch up, and as I looked past him, into the patch, I couldn't help but feel an unimaginable fear that I could only immediately compare to that of the level of fear in my nightmare a few weeks prior. As soon as we made it out of the patch and back to the fence, we hopped the fence, crossed the street and made our way back home. We laughed at ourselves along the way, but we both every now and then talk about that day and can never figure out what happened. I stopped running down that trail since that day, and slowly began running in my school track instead. I was about 6. It was the late 90s. Think small poor town in the Northeast. We were poor too as well then, and we lived with my grandparents and great-grandmother in the family home. I slept in a room facing the backyard, my grandparents across the hall, and my parents downstairs. When I woke this one night, there was a light flashing throughout the entire house, red-green, alternating back and forth like when a power truck or a cop car is out front of the house at night. Me both needing to pee and being a curious child, I woke up and went to the bathroom. The bathroom faced the road, and that was where the light was coming from. I climbed up on the heater to get a good look out of the window. When I saw this thing, the light was level with the second-story window and was on a ring. The thing had the shape almost like a Beyblade, or a battle top, and the light were on the flat part of the top with the pointed part being in the center of the road. The lights were only about 10 feet or so from the house, and the house is a 40 feet back from the road. Once I got the look at it, the terror set in, and I bolted for my grandparents' room. My mother apparent watched it from the living room for a while, and Dad saw it too, though we only got him to admit like last year. The terror I will never forget. There was only one other time I felt that, and that was also a UFO. It's like when you're camping and you see a big bear on the other side of the clearing, except more intense. I worked at a car factory in Detroit. This was early mid-1980s. I was in my early 20s. I worked on the assembly line. Some car parts were short and so production had to end early that night until more parts arrived the next morning. We were sent home early, around 11 p.m. Our shift usually ended at 1:30 am. Me and some buddies decided to meet up at the local bar, have a couple of beers, burgers, and shoot some pool before they closed at 2 a.m. The bar was in the local neighborhood, which is a very old part of Detroit. I made my way to my car and proceed down a neighborhood street, lined with large, old homes, on my way to the corner bar. The street has houses from the 1930s, or older that are close together. The older streets are narrow and with cars parked on the street in front of the houses, there is barely room for a car to navigate down the street. Very cramped. On my way to the bar, traveling around 30 to 35 miles per hour, a middle-aged man of about 55 years of age shot out into the street in a hurried walk. He popped out 2 feet in front of me from in between the parked cars. He gave me absolutely zero chance of hitting my brakes before I might hit him. The streets are cramped and I have nowhere to go to avoid hitting him. He turned his head towards me and we shot a look of surprise at each other. I shut my eyes and slammed on the brakes knowing I could do nothing but hit him. One thing I always remember was he had a full suit on with a hat. But he was wearing the wrong time era clothes. His clothes were dusty too. Go and Google Depression era suit and you'll see what he was wearing. Not only were his clothes way out of date, I found it strange that he was wearing a full suit with a hat at 11:30 p.m. on a weeknight. He bolted in front of my bumper, I shut my eyes, slammed on the brakes and quickly came to a stop. I know I'd hit him but I didn't see his body in front of my car. I jumped out of my car and didn't see him in front of me, under any cars around me, or under my car. I didn't feel an impact and my front bumper was clean. I even went and checked the sidewalks on both sides of the street. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. I figured if nothing else, I would find a hat lying around somewhere. I pulled my car forward to see if a body would come out from underneath it. Nothing. I read the next day's newspaper to see if there were any stories related to a hit and run. Nothing. I was awake, alert, and oriented when this happened. I know what I saw. As I think back on this, I wonder if I saw a real ghost. I just don't know exactly what happened that night. I worked at a movie theater in a mall that was built in the early 80s, maybe even late 70s. When it was built, there was a body found on the premises that had never been identified. The place was super creepy and there were a lot of things that happened there. But one of the creepiest was an experience I had in the booth. The projection booth was probably the most haunted part of the building. One night I was starting a movie which involved threading the projector. I was focusing on getting it done quickly since I was a little late starting, and I heard a male voice call my name from somewhere on the opposite end of the booth. I yelled back in response, "Yay," because I wasn't looking in that direction. No one responded. I finished up starting the movie and walked out from between the projectors and yelled hello, yay. But I didn't see anyone. I went back downstairs and walked up to the 2 male ushers and asked them what they wanted. They said they hadn't been in the booth and had no idea what I was talking about. The door to the booth is locked and the only people with the keys were me and the other female manager. The other manager was in the office, and there was no one else there that night. There were a ton of things that happened there, but this is the one that comes to mind as I don't really have an explanation for it. Moved into my brother's and friend's finished basement/laundry room. There were no windows at all, so it would be pitch black at night except for the glow of my alarm clock. It was literally at least 10 to 15 degrees colder than the rest of the house. I often slept with the covers over my head because if not, my nose would get cold enough to wake me up. On one such night, I woke up and felt like someone was in the room. I looked in the corner and saw my brother slowly walking back from the washer/dryer with his arms stretched out, trying to find his way in the dark. I thought maybe he was checking the dryer for something he was going to wear in the morning. But as I became more awake and my eyes adjusted to what little light there was, I focused on him a little more and realized it wasn't my brother. The figure was taller and skinnier. He had a much thicker stubbly beard than my brother could grow. He wasn't trying to find his way in the dark. He was walking straight towards me, staring at me, and reaching for me. My heart almost jumped out of my chest, as I involuntarily shot up into a sitting position, about to sprint out of bed, and I yelled, "What the fuck?" But he had disappeared. I tried to convince myself I was just seeing things, waking from a dream in poor lighting. But the feeling never left me. I went up and slept on the couch that night, and every other night until I moved out. So my family and I used to live in Okinawa, Japan because my dad was stationed there, Air Force. For a while we stayed in an apartment complex before officially moving into our home in Kadena Air Force Base. I was really young, probably around 5 or 6 years old at the time, and I would have a lot of bad nightmares. I can't remember what they were about since it was so long ago, but they were frequent enough to worry my mom. She would even place a small plate of salt on my windowsill. I know it was to try and help with my nightmares, but I'm not entirely sure where that practice comes from. So this pretty much goes on for the duration of us living in Okinawa in general, and once we moved away, the nightmares became less frequent. Still had nightmares like everyone else though, but that's normal I think. Years later we eventually came back to visit some family for a while, and when we did, bam, I had the worst nightmare I've ever had to this day. Thinking about it still gives me a really sinking feeling. I'll try and describe it as best I can. In my dream, I was this young boy who would often play with his best friend. I remember feeling very intimidated of my father, in the dream, not my real father. This was someone else, who didn't like my best friend for some reason. The dream somehow progresses, I don't remember the details, and I'm walking into a bit tent set in front of the house. Inside, I saw my father slicing my best friend's head like you would with a hunk of meat in a deli. What really disturbed me was how the cleaver didn't cut clean either. Like he had to really struggle to cut through, and it just was absolutely awful. I woke up and couldn't sleep the rest of the night, and struggled to sleep the next few nights afterwards. Now it could totally be just the fact that I was young, and maybe there's a statistic that says children are more prone to nightmares than adults. Who knows honestly? But I am willing to believe that there could have been a possible paranormal aspect to all this. Anyone who knows a little about Okinawan history will tell you that this island has seen a lot of hard times, and it wouldn't be too much of a stretch to say there could be an abundance of restless spirits hanging around. Add that to the fact that earlier this year my mom and I were chatting about this, and my mom told me that there was an old family tomb just near our old apartment. I was working a summer job at Pier 1 Imports. After which I never want to see Wicker again in my life, but I digress. I'm working the register and it's a slow day as usual, with only a couple of customers browsing the store. Then in walk 2 people, a woman and a teen 20 guy. Both are thin, both with long black hair, both with skin about as white as paper, and both dressed all in black, the woman in a flowing dress, the guy in black jeans and a black button-down shirt. They begin browsing the candle aisle, sort of passing their open palms slowly back and forth in front of the candles and whispering to each other. I was kinda getting weirded out because it was nowhere near Halloween in the middle of August. Between ringing out customers, I notice they are keeping up their routine up and down a few more aisles. Eventually, they come up to the register with a few large black candles and black candle pillars. After bagging their purchase and ringing them up, they pay in cash. And their change is $6.66. As they leave the store, I print a copy of their receipt and head back to the manager's office. I tell her what happened and show her the receipt. Oh yeah. That was the local witch and her apprentice. They come in here all the time. I'll bet you'll have to restock the black candles, am I right? My house is 3 stories high, and my dad, being paranoid, he has cameras all throughout the house and outside, and I have 3 siblings. Me and my older brother sleep on the top floor, and my sister sleeps on the second floor. So naturally, whenever I hear a noise while I'm sleeping, I shrug it off and blame my siblings. Right. Wrong, I've been afraid of any peep or bang I've ever heard in the night. So obviously when I hear a blood-curdling scream from the kitchen, I am scared shitless. My older brother was at work, he worked from 5 to 12 this night. So I think that it's my little sister fucking around. So immediately my fear has faded into sheer rage for what I had thought she had done. I shouldn't have been that paused at a scream, but being siblings I found any way to get pissed at them. I stomped down the stairs ready to give her a piece of my mind. When I go downstairs I see nothing. I had though she ran into her room and was fake sleeping, so I stormed in there and found her bed empty. I would later find out she had gone to a friend's for a sleepover. I did not know this, so I walk around her room trying to find her before I hear a pair of feet scurry across the floor behind me. I twirl around to see what I can only assume to be a, well, ghost. I remember being a 5'8" kid. I felt so tiny compared to this pitch black entity, and as soon as I blinked it was gone. I ran out of my sister's room, up the stairs and into mine. I ran into my bed, hid under the covers. I eventually fell asleep. In the morning I told my father about this experience and he said he would check the cameras in the house. This is what we saw. When I heard the scream and ran out of my room, and as I ran out of the room the same black figure I had seen was appeared in my closet. The rest of the cameras showed it following me, right behind my back. I move out of the house for college 4 months later, and I would never sleep over at that house again. So back in 2020, I was really weighed down mentally because of school. My grades were low, I didn't understand any of the assignments, and my teachers would never respond to my emails on time. Overall, I was wondering if I even wanted to live anymore. Then I started seeing things. There's no true way to describe them, but I am sure that I was seeing demons in broad daylight. One day I'm just trying to relax in my room for a minute when all of a sudden, I hear someone whisper my name in my left ear as clear as day. Just out of the blue. I jumped and spun around to see nothing. I just wrote this off as being paranoid and went back to the important task of staring off in space as my mind is screaming, "Why aren't you worried?" But I decided that if it was time for me to go, I'll go. Then as I'm just staring at my wall, I see a shadow behind me. Of course my only instinct is to turn around and see who is behind me. Once again, I see nothing. Now I'm spooked. I decide that I'm just tired and should go to sleep, so I get up and make my way downstairs to get a drink and some melatonin. I go through this routine every night, so it is nothing new, but this time, I felt like I was being watched. I am of course aware of this and feel creeped out. Nonetheless, I finish up and go back upstairs. I end up being able to fall asleep and sleep until about 11 o'clock in the morning. This was during lockdown, so I wasn't worried about being late for anything. So I go about my daily routine and nothing odd really happened for a while. Then one day, the same thing happens. I feel like I'm being watched, see shadows, hear whispers, etc. This time, however, I actually see the thing. Of course I saw it through my closet door, but here's the thing, the only reason that I noticed it was because the closet door started to slide open on its own. I'm not sure exactly how to describe it, but I'll try my best. The first thing I noticed was how tall the thing was, which was around 6 to 7 feet tall. The second thing I noticed was its dark beady eyes. They looked more like a void than regular black, with pure white pupils that were too small to be considered natural. On top of all that, it looked extremely skinny and had very pale skin. Just as suddenly as I saw it, it jerked its head back into my closet with inhuman speed. Since I am home alone at the time, I wasn't freaking around, so I grabbed my CO2 gun that can shoot a 10-gram bullet 1,700 feet per second, and unloaded the 10-round magazine into the closet door. I reloaded and hesitantly approached the closet and threw the door open to see. Yep, you guessed it, nothing. I understandably decided to sleep on the couch that night. There were 4 more entities that I saw during the rest of the year, one of which I still see sometimes. The one that I still occasionally see I have named the Rift because it looks like a cluster of floating glass needles. I will only see it when I am about to fall asleep, and it will always be on my ceiling. Usually, it will crawl across my room on my ceiling all the way to my bed and then proceed to crawl down my wall at me. I do my best to ignore it, but I can't help but lose sleep some night because I don't know what it is, or why it only bothers me. I'm a night owl because nighttime is usually when I'm the most productive. I procrastinate a lot, so I use the night to catch up with schoolwork. A couple weeks ago, at around 2 a.m., I started hearing a weird animal noises coming from downstairs. I have 2 cats, so it's possible that they just got in a fight with each other, but it sounded different from what my cats usually do. It was raspier than my cats and had slight hints of a female voice in it. Again, I might have just been sleep deprived and was hearing my cats fight, but it scared the shit out of me. Last week I heard screaming outside my window that actually lasted quite a while. This time it sounded a bit more natural. Imagine someone hyperventilating and screaming at every exhale, so it could have been someone messing around outside. I live in a small village, so we don't have any meth heads walking around or anything though. Now I've recently noticed that there's sometimes a rhythmic tapping sound coming from the bathroom window that hangs over the sink. Our bathroom has an incline roof, that kind of fades away after a while. I don't have the guts to look up and see if it's just the house settling or if someone or something is actually tapping at the glass, and I probably won't ever try to look at it. I've had a few throughout my life, but the creepiest experience I had when I was 4 years old. I was living in the middle of nowhere, Alabama, and a bad storm came through one night. I asked my parents if I could sleep in their room because I was scared, and my parents told me no. I went to my room and couldn't sleep. I was laying in bed and realized the blinds were open and I could see outside. I noticed yellow eyes staring at me through the window. Lightning flashed and I saw what looked like a human covered in mud. He slammed his hand on my window and I ran to my parents' room. They let me sleep in their room because I told them what happened. The next morning we went to my room and there was a massive muddy handprint on the window. For context, my dad told me my window was easily 9 feet off the ground. There were no shoe prints or any proof someone was there. I am 26 now and I remember it clearly. It's the only full memory I have from being that young. My parents told me not to bring it up again and we've never talked about it since. I remember my wife received a package at our apartment that had a dress in it in a style she never wore, and it was the size he normally buys. The package had no return label and no name on it, just the address. We tossed it. Or when we moved into our house, she complained about noises and a loud thumping in the house. I took a nap one day and dreamed about sitting in the second floor office area, heard a noise so loud in my dream I woke up in a cold sweat, haven't heard that noise ever again and neither has she complained. One story: in the Marines we had our room inspections on a Thursday night and my buddy rushed to me freaking out the next morning. He said he woke up to his alarm facing the wall, and when he got up to move it, the time was wrong, and when he turned back around to his bed he saw what he says the face of a demon. He said he woke up after all this happened as he was dreaming and he found his bathroom door covered in hammer welts that weren't there the night before. So when I was about 16, my mom, my sister, and I moved into a new house. It looked a little older but was a little redone on the inside. The first viewing was nice, it seemed really cozy and I remember being cool with it. Well, fast forward to the night we moved in. It's dark outside, and we're still moving boxes into the house. As soon as we're done we go in, shut, and lock the door. I was standing in the living room. Boxes were scattered everywhere and nothing was put up yet. I remember all of a sudden in the middle of talking to my mom this chilling feeling running through my body. It caught my breath and I stopped talking mid-sentence. I was able to look around before the feeling intensified to the point tears were uncontrollably rolling down my face. I remember mom trying to calm me down and frantically asking what was wrong. I tried to speak but couldn't. It felt like an extreme case of a panic attack from what others have said, but it isn't something I've ever had issues with, and still don't to this day. Once I was finally able to get words out, I was telling my mom someone was watching us. When I did finally get it out, I kept repeating it. Still crying, goosebumps everywhere. I felt as if someone was cynically staring at my family, as if a presence was with us and we were in danger. My mom was trying to see outside the blindless windows if someone was outside, but it was pitch black. I remember her running outside and screaming to scare off whatever, but she had came back in and saw nothing. And a few more minutes went by before everything ceased just as quick as it had started. I could speak normally, I could breath, no more ominous feeling. Needless to say, we didn't stay there that night. But we did finish moving in the next day. We only stayed there for about 3 months before we ended up moving out. I never had the extreme feeling happen again to me, but different instances of different things moving, instances of someone whispering our names, etc. got to be too much for both me and my sister. So that was that, but even typing this it's giving me chills. When I say it was the most creepy thing ever, for me, I literally felt as if death was upon me or something. I was, in a sense, paralyzed, and it still haunts me to this day what would have happened or could have happened had we stayed. It happened when I was on my year abroad in Hawaii. I was working on a small farm where there weren't many permanent workers. People would come from all over and work for a place to stay. At the time we weren't too many workers at the farm, yet I did have a roommate at the time. Since I would Skype with my boyfriend back home most nights and didn't want to disrupt her sleep, I went to another room in the main house. It had been around 2 o'clock and I was sitting at the desk in front of a window looking over the farm. I knew that one of my friends hadn't gone to his cabin and was instead sleeping outside on a couch right next to the room I was in, so I still tried to be quiet. We were just talking on Skype when suddenly I heard the screen door to the living room being slammed open and shut extremely loud, especially regarding the time. My boyfriend had heard it too and asked me what the noise was. I answered that it had been the screen door and mentioned that it must be my friend, who was sleeping outside, who would probably come in any second and tell me to go to bed, as he liked to do when I stayed up late. So I turned to the door of the room I was in, expecting him to bust in any second, but he didn't. I was kind of confused but not really concerned at the time. I tried getting back into our conversation as I heard the screen door open and shut very loudly yet again, and what sounded like naked feet on cement walk off. At that point I was pretty annoyed, thinking about my roommate and friends upstairs who were sleeping and probably disrupted by the noise. I kept on taking to my boyfriend for a bit, even about how annoying my friend, the one who slept outside, was for doing something like that in the middle of the night. Soon after I decided that I should get to bed if I wanted to be of any use in the morning. I packed up my laptop and walked across the room to the door. It was then when I noticed the door was opened. I stood there for a moment in disbelief. I knew it had been closed when I turned to check if my friend would come in. I went to my room quickly and locked the door. I thought to myself that maybe my friend did come in and didn't shut the door out of protest and to get on my nerves. The next morning when I saw him, I told him to please shut the door next time and not be that loud since people were trying to sleep. But he just looked at me in utter confusion. "Because you came into the room last night when I was Skyping?" I said. He swore that he didn't and that he woke up around 4 a.m. in the same position he went to sleep in, on the couch. I proceeded to ask everyone who lived on the farm if they got up during the night or had a history of sleepwalking, but nobody did. When I told my boss, he was living in another house on the property, he said if something like that ever happened again I should call for him and he would be there in seconds. Me and my roommate kept our bedroom door locked after that. She was pretty freaked out as well. It was by far the creepiest thing I've experienced in my life so far, and until this day I have no idea who came into the house or if they really opened the door to the room I was in and watched me. There was a mother living on the property with her grown-up son, and some of my friends suggested that maybe he broke in that night. In my opinion that's highly unlikely though, I never saw them and they weren't peculiar at all.